Speak bold, ain't tripping on the haters. It could take freedom from a cold dead hands. We're locked and loaded for the last dance. 'Cause we're the new American gangsters, ready to die for this man.
Well, thank you, Kill Will, for that song. And speaking of speaking boldly, there's all kinds of headlines out there right now about our Board of Supervisors and our county recorder. You know, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors has had a long history of not really giving a damn what the Maricopa County voters think. And with this new board, there's some new board members on there. We were hoping that would change, but it seems under the legacy leadership of Thomas Galvin, he's now declared a Cold War against our county recorder. And, you know, is this just a continuation of what we've seen before? The headlines seem to indicate so. What are your thoughts on this, Brian?
Well, I thought it was good that we get a group of people together that we could, sort of go through these two agreements. And I'm just going to refer to them as the pre-heap agreement and the post-heap agreement. The post-heap agreement being what I also refer to as the, rehabilitate Stephen Richard's reputation agreement. But I think it's important because you have everybody coming out and saying, different things. I've looked at a lot of the media you guys have there in Maricopa County or the state of Arizona, and I'm not really seeing the media really say a whole lot about this other than a tweet every now and then that says, "Oh, Stephen Richard says that Heap's a liar." Well, who's the liar? So I thought, let's get together, let's go through this agreement, and let's let the people be able to decide for themselves by showing them what these agreements think. And it's hugely important. This agreement is the bedrock, will be the bedrock of Arizona elections, right? Because Maricopa County constitutes over 60% of the state of Arizona's votes. And Maricopa County itself, over 80% of its ballots will be cast by mail or by some form of early voting. And so those are the recorder's responsibilities, i.e., signature verification, things of that nature. And so this is an entire would appear to be an effort that could completely turn Arizona elections on their head and call them into even more question than they have been called in the past. So I think it's important that they get this worked out and everybody knows who's actually responsible for what. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about this, and as a board, we decided to put out a call to action, right? We wanted Supervisor Chairman Thomas Galvin to let us know what his intent was with the elections. You know, we said, is Thomas Galvin and his bureaucrat going to run the elections? We need to know. The American people, Maricopa County citizens need to know. Well, that kind of stirred some stuff up because the Board of Supervisors started receiving emails and phone calls, and so they started responding. So some of those responses are really conflicting. You've got Debbie Lesko in her response, and she talks about how her highest priority as a supervisor is election integrity. It's the most important thing to her. And she basically kind of pushes the blame back on Justin, saying, well, I asked him to provide me a list of what it is that he wants, and I haven't gotten that list yet. And so, you know, she says he has full control over voter registration, maintaining the voter rolls, mailing out the mail-in ballots, and verifying ballot signatures. So, you know, hey, what's the problem, right? According to Supervisor Lesko, she says, you know, this is on Justin, no big deal, not a big deal. We're gonna take care of Recorder Heap. So then Thomas Galvin puts out a statement and says conversations between the board and its staff and the recorder and his staff have been happening for weeks. So despite the factual errors in Recorder Heap's statement, I don't view this as a battle. He says everything is normal. Nothing's changed. Everything's good. I don't understand why Heap is saying what he's saying. So this is why I think we decided to come here today, right? Is what is the truth? Because then you got Justine Heap. Justine Heap is saying, we have a problem here. We're in a battle with the Board of Supervisors over who has authority of our election. And so you got the supervisors, nothing to see here. Everything's good. Kind of like what they did in 2020 when they said, this is the best ran election ever, right? Nothing to see here. There is no battle. Everything's good. You guys need to slow your roll. So let's talk about what that shared service agreement is, right? In 2019, there was an operational agreement, a shared operational agreement that was signed that developed a program that had co-directors. So the recorder hired a director and the Board of Supervisors hired a director. And these two directors would do the day-to-day operations of elections, working together and report back to the powers that be of our elected officials, right?
And really, really quickly, just adding to that, that agreement was negotiated because of the 2018 election, where the recorder had all election responsibility balled up into his hands. And up until that point in time, it was probably one of the most questionable elections in the history of the state of Arizona. They made the changes in 2019, and so just so those people watching this are aware, right? You had, and if you watched the Lake v. Hobbs trial, this became very apparent. You had Ray Valenzuela, who represented the recorder's office as the top managerial person in the elections department, and then on the other hand, you had Scott Jarrett representing the Board of Supervisors as the top managerial person in the elections department, and they both worked co-jointly down at MC Tech to run the totality of elections on behalf of both the recorder and Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, can I interrupt too?
Absolutely right.
Yeah, they made some big changes, right, in anticipation of the election. And if one reserves judgment, you wait to see what the impact of those big changes are. But they definitely made big changes in anticipation of something. And we're about to find out. We're about to see from those changes the impact of those, what maybe it was that they were anticipating and trying to head off ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
So what did the 2019 agreement look like? A lot of these things will look familiar to those people that are involved in elections. What it looked like is the recorder was then charged with election services. So what constitutes election services? Campaign finance, candidate filings, petition verifications, right? Those day-to-day things, even so much as communication and public records, and early voting. So early voting would constitute mail-in ballots. It would constitute signature verification, UACAVA, right? And also wrapped into that, because it seemed to make the most sense, was provisional ballots. So underneath the recorder, there was the Director of Election Services and Early Voting. Then you got the BOS side, the Board of Supervisors side, who handled election day and emergency voting. Now, part of why they took the emergency voting component, for those that don't know, is that was one of the most contentious moments in 2018, is when Adrian Fontes decided to set up 5 emergency voting locations in predominantly Democrat blue districts where there were few Republican voters. So that was one of the things that the Board of Supervisors was trying to head off, right? So what does that look like? Well, they were responsible for getting the equipment and supplies to the vote centers, selecting and contracting those vote centers, and recruiting and training poll workers at the various locations. Underneath them, they had their Director of Election Day Emergency Voting. And I think you said earlier, Brian, isn't that Scott Jarrett, and then on the recorder side, Ray Valenzuela?
Right. And so in looking at this slide on the left under recorder, it would have been Ray Valenzuela. On the right, it would have been Scott Jarrett. And I think it's also important, very, very critically important, something we're going to talk about coming up here in a bit, that's not really reflected into this 2019 agreement, or at least on this flow chart, is the fact that the Maricopa County Recorder plays the exceptionally significant role of serving as the registrar of voters, right? He's statutorily responsible for voter registration and maintaining the voter registration database. And so that, with respect to our elections, the integrity of our voter registration database is absolutely paramount, right? It's got to be top notch. And so we're going to talk about that and how some of these structural changes impact Justine Heap's ability to fulfill the duties of his office in a competent manner. And so continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. So when you look at this, right, everything in the orange in the middle, these are what they call shared responsibility. So Ray Valenzuela and Scott Jarrett would work together on behalf of the Board of Supervisors and the Recorder to do ballot design, to set and implement the budget, to set up the organizational structure, right? To do pre-LNA testing on the tabulators and testing of the equipment, running a communication department. Everything was kind of a joint service aside from voter rolls on one side and poll locations on the other. So how did it change? So in 2024, the agreement went further away from being a shared agreement and became more of, this is your responsibility as a board, this is your responsibility as the recorder, and there really are no shared areas of operation whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the agreement specifically states that this eliminates co-directors and it eliminates any shared responsibilities. So
Right,
let's
and
look at
so
what that looks
basically-
like now.
Well, basically, what it does is it demotes Ray Valenzuela, doesn't it? And it basically places the brunt of all elections in the hands of Scott Jarrett. And I just want to make clear right now, if you watch the Lake v. Hobbs trial, I mean, it should have been clear to everybody that Scott Jarrett, when he changed his testimony, actually from day one to day two, with respect to the issues involving the election day debacle, where there were long lines because the printers were printing out odd size ballots that would not then tabulate. And so Stephen, on his second day, Scott Jarrett then testified that, oh, well, we've been investigating this issue for how many years, right? So our elections, the totality, the brunt of the elections in Maricopa County have now been placed in the hands, thanks to the Board of Supervisors and their infinite wisdom, in the hands of a man who has been unable to identify what is more likely than not malware that had been placed on their printers to do exactly what they did. And he still has absolutely no idea. Maricopa County spent millions of dollars, hiring somebody to study the issue. They then come out and blame essentially the printer manufacturer, who then demanded a retraction because everything they were saying was false. And so this is very, very questionable. It does not bode well for Arizona elections moving forward.
So what would you say, Chris, are some of the key takeaways on the impact of basically having Scott Jarrett now take control of all of these areas of operation in the central blue box?
Well, it's moved a lot of responsibilities out of the hands of two people and into the hands of one. And we have a lot of experience with Ray Valenzuela, and he's been doing this a long time, and he at least has a lot of experience that is not going to get used for our elections going forward. And I think that's a big mistake. And like Brian said, Scott Jarrett has been working on debugging these printers regarding this problem for, he says, several elections. And that doesn't look good at all, that he's been researching this problem. Apparently he hasn't got the right people working on it. Doesn't have the right talent, or doesn't know how to identify the talent, and to have printers printing out the wrong size ballots so they're untabulatable. And literally, if you print out ballots that are the wrong size, it's not like you can just take them down to the main tabulators at MCTEC and have them tabulated there. If they don't work in the field, they don't work there. They have to be duplicated. And this is a big problem to have not solved in all that time. And that doesn't look good for Scott Jarrett.
Well, and I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. You know, I highlighted the tabulation and equipment in the middle there in red, because when I look at this, I just think to myself, Recorder Heap promised a transparent and auditable election, right? One of the things we've struggled with most is access to the proper files, the proper documents, the proper public records, so that these elections can be audited. So do I have my tinfoil hat on when I'm sitting here thinking, if they pull all of that responsibility out from underneath the recorder, does that then prohibit the recorder from actually knowing what's going on in our elections?
Well, not being a technical guy, I would say yes, it does, but I would defer to Chris on that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you need to be all that technical to know that if you take responsibility or authority away from somebody, especially an elected official, somebody that the people chose to make sure that our elections are run securely and run correctly, if you take away influence and control and authority over that area, and you put it in the hands of a bureaucrat, then you've done exactly what the people, done exactly the opposite of what the people asked you to do when they elected, when they kicked out the old recorder and put in a new one. I mean, this is part of an indication of what they were anticipating, what they were thinking about when they changed the agreement before the new county recorder came into power. So
Well,
I think that's obvious, right?
Yeah, can I ask you a question, Shelby? I had heard somebody say that one of the board of the supervisors, maybe the chairman, had said, they want to, stop all these election integrity freaks from being able to get records and criticize our elections. Is that correct?
Yeah, so here's the problem, Brian, is Thomas Galvin is kind of touting, and I've heard this from more than one person, that he was heavily reelected as the board of supervisor in his district, and that was a mandate from the voters to stop these election deniers and the propaganda that they're pushing. The problem I have with that narrative, Brian, is the average citizen looks at the recorder and says, that's who does my elections. Now, those of us
I
that are
agree.
involved in elections, we know better, right? We know
Right.
the influence the BOS has. But the average voter, when they think of a board of supervisor, they think of somebody who's doing budgeting and signing contracts. They don't think
Right.
elections.
Agreed. And so that's why, I remember when we did the audit. I remember Stephen Richard delivering the ballots to the Coliseum in 2021. You were there, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember his smug ass just treating everybody else like they were everybody, that was there for the audit, as if they were just mindless zombies, right? And so, Stephen Richer, I think, made it his career during his 4-year tenure as recorder. I think it was his actual job, as opposed to being recorder, to shut the election integrity movement down and to shut us up. And that's why he worked overtime to demean characters and reputations in an effort to stop people from being able to get access to legitimate public records, so that we can simply verify that our government is doing what it is supposed to be doing. And so, Stephen Richer was long viewed as the focal point of our elections. I mean, you watch the 2022 election, and who's there? Stephen Richer standing next to Bill Gates, speaking very heavily about what's taking place on election day. And so you know, the recorder is a natural focal point for the person to be running our elections. This structure now where the BOS wants to take control of most of our elections, right? What are we going to, how many members of the Board of Supervisors do you have in Maricopa County?
5.
Five, right? What's it going to be like after the 2026 elections? I can see it now, right? Their fault, not my fault, right? And then they're going to try to push as much of the responsibility for what's going to take place in 2026 if they don't fix this agreement off on Justine Heal. And I think that's what the ultimate goal is.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think you're right. I mean, this is what they were able to do in 18. Then these agreements came out, and I think they're just shifting everything back so that nobody has to take ownership. At least under the 2019 agreement, it was clear. You could look in that agreement and you could see every line item and know
Yeah.
who was responsible. And now it's just like, well, you know, it is what it is and what we say it is. And the recorder may do it if we let him, but then he may not if we don't. But really, we're just in charge of all of this.
And really quickly, I just want to point out to people listening and viewers that if you go to the WTP USAA website, you will be able to actually download both the pre-heap and the post-heap agreements. Is that correct?
That is
And so
correct.
people should download them, and people should read them for themselves, and people should say, hey, you know, what gives? And so that way they can make up their own mind.
Agree. So we know there's drastic changes, right? I mean, it's visually apparent in this grafting how much of a big change there's been, but what are some of those key changes? Let's talk about that. Let's kind of zero in on some of those things. Number one, in 2019, there was a subsection F on page 8 of the contract that said both directors are responsible for ensuring the safeguarding and integrity of elections for the areas under their authority. This includes requirements by statute, et cetera, right? Including the recorder's office is responsible for security related to information technology and network security. So all of the talks about we can't get access to the servers, we can't check the networks. There was all kinds of controversy in 2020 about how secure is our elections anyway. Well, under the 2019 agreement, Justine Heal could actually investigate that and answer those questions. Well, in the 2024 version of the agreement, this whole voting security paragraph has been removed from the agreement without delineating who is responsible for the security of the information and networks. What does that look like to you, Chris?
Well, if they've taken this away from him entirely, let's look at this from a business point of view. If you're responsible for the elections database, which is the bare minimum of the responsibilities for the recorder, if you're responsible for that area and you don't even have control over it, you don't even have the tools that you need to take care of that responsibility. They've really cut his legs out from under him to be able to take care of his responsibilities.
Yeah, let's look at the next slide, Shelby, because I think that's a critical area here. Well, okay, go to the next one. Let's jump ahead, and we can come back to this one. All right, information technology moved to the Board of Supervisors, right? And so the first sentence there that you have in bold and red, I think, is what Chris was just getting to. And that is the meat and potatoes of the Maricopa County Recorder's Office and his ability to perform his probably most important statutory function, which is serving as the registrar of voters. Okay, the registrar of voters is the person who validates, the people who are registering to vote as being actual people who can register to vote and that will receive a ballot in an election. Hugely important when we talk about our elections moving forward. But that sentence is pretty clear. The board shall provide and maintain all IT related services for the recorder's election and business related responsibilities. And so, I mean, to me, Chris, that is absolutely huge. Does Justine Heap have the ability to maintain the voter registration database based on this provision?
Yeah, this is actually what I was getting at. If you're, so the registration database is a database, right? And Justine Heap isn't necessarily a database guy, which means in order to administer this database, he needs an IT staff. He needs a database, a staff of people in IT who understands databases and can maintain them. And they have literally taken away that staff and put it under the Board of Supervisors. Now, in the agreement, they say, well, we'll be cooperative in any requests that he makes. But why in the world would you take away the staff and not allow him to actually supervise the people that are that are performing the key role that is his role? So we mentioned those people who are what do we call those people who believe that elections don't exist? Election deniers. So let's say that you're an election denier. Let's say that that's part of the community that elected Justine Heap because they want him to go in and debug, either prove that it works, prove that it's secure, prove that the processes are correct, or find the problems in the process. So if I had that job, I've been doing database work for 20 years, I would start by, getting the credentials and going in and starting from the beginning of the process, understanding the first step to the next step to the next step of the election process as supported by the database. I'd go and look for all the weaknesses. I'd look for the strengths. I'd look for the process flow. Basically I'd be looking for the weaknesses, right? Well, Justin can't do that because he doesn't have that background. So how would he do it? He would instruct his IT staff to go look through the database, just like I described from the beginning, each process, each query, each algorithm, every step, every part of the process to debug it or make sure that it works correctly or make sure that it works. Actually, he has the responsibility for improving the process if he can. And without an IT staff, he doesn't have any of that capability. He's at the whim of the Board of Supervisors to do anything that he wants to do. And back to the business point of view, to take that away from him from a business point of view is nonsense. It makes no sense that he wouldn't be in charge of his staff. And then if you look at it from the election integrity or the election deniers point of view, they've absolutely prevented him from doing any kind of QA work on the database and do the work of the people. Let's imagine that they exist, right? That they were part of the population that elected him. They've absolutely prevented him from doing that job that he was elected by those people to do. So back to the original intent of making the change that they made, this looks like maybe something that was involved in that decision.
Well, and it's interesting, Chris. I just want to point out, because I'm going to put my tinfoil hat back on now. Okay. In 2019, it says to assist with the performance of tasks that depend on IT infrastructure, technology, network security, programming. The Recorder's Office maintains a robust and expert IT department. Then it goes on to say, to avoid redundancy and to maintain uniformity amongst platforms, the Recorder's Office will be the primary support for all the systems being utilized by the election department. So in other words, he would interface with Dominion, right? He would interface with Runback. He would interface with Avid. He would interface with all of these contractors and technology supporters, including but not limited to site books, right? That would be his function. But if I take his IT department and I have everything go through the BOS, the IT department that they are using is the Maricopa County Enterprise Technology and Intervention Department, the ETI. Who signs those paychecks? The BOS, right? Because any funding or budgeting that comes out of Maricopa County to anything from hospitals, sheriff's departments to elections, that money goes through the BOS. So now the BOS has full control over what our IT department does, exposes, and talks about. So if you're auditing and you're finding significant flaws like technology that's over 2 decades old that the Board of Supervisors refuses to upgrade, that is causing issues such as duplicate voters and other stuff, would it not make sense that you would definitely want to be able to control that IT area so that, they may not say, hey, guys, your
Did-
technology is wrong, it's out of date, it's vulnerable.
Did you just say our voter registration database is 2 decades old?
Yeah,
Wow.
so the
Wow, so-
system we operate on is
Right.
antiquated. Yes.
Yeah, and so does Justine Heap have, as the registrar of voters by law, does Justine Heap have the ability to upgrade that voter registration database so it's not vulnerable to hacking, so that it can become more efficient without the approval and the work being done by the Board of Supervisors?
Well, Brian, they did say in the agreement that they would be cooperative. He
They
doesn't
would be
supervise,
cooperative, right?
he doesn't supervise his staff, but the Board of Supervisors said they'd be cooperative with him. They took
Right. So
away
what
his
that-
staff. But, yeah.
What that means is Justine Heap could come out next month and say, okay, we really need these serious changes made to the voter registration database before we go into the 2026 election. The Board of Supervisors, he would have to then do a work order, right? Like, and ask them, hey, Board of Supervisors, I want to make these changes. My ice cream machine is down at McDonald's, and can you come fix it? And we all know, there are memes everywhere about ice cream machines not getting fixed at McDonald's, right? And so they could sit on that, couldn't they? And not actually do anything or implement any of the changes that he has requested until after the election. And then, they get the opportunity to say, hey, Justine Heap, he's the registrar of voters. He's supposed to maintain this, right? And so it becomes, oh, not my fault, right? It's like,
Not only does he not have the ability to directly influence the upgrades or the repairs to the system, he doesn't even have direct supervision over the people who can tell him what's wrong with it. He can't even know what needs to be done to the database to upgrade it or fix it without a staff that he's in constant communication with and has supervisory authority over. He can't even know what needs to be done without those people.
Right. And so this is why I talked earlier about the import of Maricopa County for the state of Arizona in statewide elections, right? Over 60% of the statewide vote. And of that 60%, over 80% will be mail-in votes that most of which will have to be signature verified, right? And so if Justine Heap does not have access to an IT department, can he make changes or implement any changes to the voter signature verification program to make that program more responsive and remove fraud from the system, or to make it quicker so that they can get their job done in a timely manner now that this fake governor you guys have in the state of Arizona has vetoed the recent legislation that would have repaired some of those problems?
Well, I think the answer to that is no.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a big deal, right? So when Justin goes on record saying they took my IT department, this is nothing to take lightly. So this, oh, relax, don't worry about it, nonchalant attitude from the Board of Supervisors, I think we can fairly confidently say, you're wrong. You're
Okay,
wrong.
so in essence, what they have done is they have saddled and go back to the previous slide. I think this is a good point to talk about that previous slide, right? All right, so notice shall be given, right? In the 2019 agreement, they said we'll give the new recorder when elected notice and an opportunity to recommend amendments to this agreement as they think are important for them to be able to do their job, right? They removed that completely from the agreement that they sent to Justine Heal, and they have unilaterally said this agreement will apply to your successors in interest, period. No questions asked, right? And so that in essence, what this agreement is doing, and whether, without getting into the legal niceties of it, yeah, the Board of Supervisors is statutorily responsible for X, so they can do X if they want to do X, and the recorder is responsible for Y, and he's got to do Y. But it would appear to me what they've done to Justine Heal in the areas of being the registrar of voters and the signature verification program is they have saddled him with the programs as they're created by Stephen Richer. Would you agree with that?
Well, there's evidence to actually point exactly to what you're saying, Brian. So the first service agreement was signed in 2019. What
Mhm.
is the key about 2019? It's an off-cycle year, right? So you have an election in 2018, no election in 2019, election in 2020. When was the next shared service agreement signed? It was signed in 2021, off-cycle year. Then we go forward to May of 2023 when Richer signed the new shared service agreement. So that's an off-cycle year, right? What happened with this most recent agreement is it was signed on October 12th of 2024, days before Stephen Richer was going to turn the keys to the kingdom over to Justine Heal. This
Right.
is an anomaly that clearly shows political targeting.
Right. And so this is more like instead of what we talk about as democracy, right? What we know as democracy in the United States is we elect representatives to make policy decisions on our behalf. This is sort of like an aristocracy, right? Where this governing elite, those that sit in their lofty ivory towers, get to govern us. And so this is sort of a holdover that and that's what I mean by saying, it's sort of the salvage of the reputation of Stephen Richer agreement in that now they'll be able to say, oh yeah, look at Justine Heal not doing his job, while they have completely tied him to the Board of Supervisors will, and made it such that he cannot change very many of the programs instituted by Stephen Richer without the consent of the Board of Supervisors, who the chairman has referred to people like us as, radical kooks. What do you
That's
think, Chris?
absolutely right. They're taking the will of the voter and the position of the county recorder, and they're essentially reducing it to allow the ongoing bureaucracy of Scott Jarrett and Thomas Galvin to continue to control how our elections are implemented and what the American people can know about how those elections are implemented.
All right. Well, do we have a slide on something near and dear to our hearts is records, right? The ability of the people to obtain records. And so, what's the story on that? Because, now, Chris, you do a lot of public records requests with the Maricopa County Elections Department. What have you noticed any significant changes, Chris?
Yes, I've noticed some significant changes. So yeah, we've done, as a group, we've done hundreds of public records requests. And I have been the author of many of those, and including some really important ones that found their way into the Kerry Lake trial. And in my experience in the past, we could have a dialogue on any public records request that was something unique. For example, if we asked for a report that had never been created before, we got some reluctance from the Public Records Department, and they would respond by saying, "Well, we don't have a report that provides the information that you're looking for, so we're non-responsive." So if I respond by saying, "Well, there's an Attorney General opinion. It's what was a previous Attorney General? What was his name? Who was the last? Anyway,
Bernovich. It was
Yes,
Bernovich.
exactly. Bernovich, thank you. So the previous Attorney General opinion said that it's not necessary for you to have an existing report. It's only necessary that you have custody of the records. And if I explained that to them in the process, they would respond by saying, well, they wouldn't actually respond by saying anything. They would just respond by moving the request forward until we finally got what we were looking for. In fact, in this process, the county and I worked together to design a report that they didn't have before, which became hopefully very useful to them. But anyway, so the changes that we've seen really three different things that are happening with the recorder's office or in that process that are different from the past. One is they're just completely ignoring some requests. And I put in some requests.
Can I add to that, Chris? Some
Yeah.
equates to about 40 public records requests that have gone completely unanswered. Okay, go
Unanswered,
ahead.
yeah. We put them in, we request something, and we don't even get a response that they've been received, that the request has been received. I presume because they anticipate that they really don't want to answer that request. So we have them ignore, that's brand new. Them ignoring requests outright, that's a brand new behavior. And then we have a similar response to what we've seen before, where they say we don't have any existing report. And when I remind them of the same thing, the Attorney General's opinion that they only need to have custody, I can remember one case where they took 2 weeks to respond and say our response stands. And if they take 2 weeks to respond, that means to me that they went to counsel and decided that they weren't even going to explain why they were denying the request. They were just going to deny it. And then when I finally asked, based on what allowance in the law did you make this denial, they didn't respond to that either. So there's no longer a collaboration going on between the public making the request and the recorder's office when a dialogue and a collaboration is valid, when it's appropriate. So that's no longer going on. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that when I make a request for something specific, they give me something different but similar. And then they tell me your request has been satisfied. Now, it seems to me, I mean, if this were a commercial, me going to a commercial organization and saying, I have a request of you that is a legitimate thing that you're able to deliver to me, that I ought to be able to be the one to say whether or not I'm satisfied with their response, right? And especially when you're making the request of public servants, even more so, I ought to be able to say when my request has been satisfied. In other words, they ought to be saying, rather than saying to me, your request is satisfied, they ought to be saying to me, does this satisfy your request, sir? And then I can say yes or no, and then we can collaborate. And but that's not the way it's happening. So these three changes are really noticeable and noticeably different. So
Let me ask you a question. Who
Sure.
would work more readily with you, Scott Jarrett or Ray Valenzuela?
Well, it was my perception in the process that these unsigned responses coming from the recorder's office were actually from Ray Valenzuela. And
Yeah.
later I verified that most of when we started a collaboration, the collaboration was between us or me and Ray Valenzuela. And that's where
Yeah,
we
and
had our cooperation. And that's where I was interfacing with somebody who actually knew what was going on. And he knew that when I made an objection based on law, he knew I was right. And he never said, oh, you're right. But he always responded by giving me what I asked for based on my objection.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's one reason that Ray Valenzuela is no longer a co-manager of the elections department. Who knows? Because
I
I
wonder.
know,
I wonder.
yeah, because
I'm definitely not having interactions with that department anymore that look in any way like Ray Valenzuela's personality based on my experience before.
So let
maybe
me add
that,
a few things to this if I can. So we're also getting denied records that we've historically always received, such as tabulator tapes, log files, cast vote records. These are things that our organization has used to analyze the elections and the health of the elections so that we can then report back to you, the Maricopa County citizens, on what those findings are. Those have now been denied from us. I've been in communication with both the recorder's office and the Board of Supervisors office on these issues. And my understanding is that the reason why is historically, if we go back to this handy slide here, the recorder's office had the ability to maintain primary support for all systems being utilized in the elections department. So if we asked for a tabulator tape or we asked for slog files, then the recorder had access to set up a day where we could come in and scan and image those, right? Now, under this new agreement, what's happening is a request comes into the recorder's office, and the recorder's office then has to forward it to the Board of Supervisors office, and somebody there has to review it and then send it back to give it to somebody to fulfill. My understanding is they are all going into drawer 3. We are filing requests. The recorder's office is taking that request, and just like our ballots in 2022, they're filing them in a drawer for Scott Jared to address at a later date. And we are 30, 40, 50 days, 60 days out before those are even being reviewed, let alone complied with. So, they've got a real issue ahead of them as far as public records compliance, because right now they are outside of the compliance of public records laws for the state of Arizona.
yeah. And so
I was going to say the overall result here is shockingly less transparency than we've had in the past. We've had struggles in the past getting the things we wanted, although in many ways they were collaborative. Now they're less transparency is the end result.
well, and the collaborative struggles we've had in the past, I think personally have given the Maricopa County Elections Department and our elected officials much better tools to be able to evaluate those people working in our elections. For example, the signature verification data that we have obtained. They worked with you collaboratively, Chris, to provide a report that showed how much time it was taking each signature verifier to verify signatures and how many in total they verified, correct? And
Yeah,
so
that's right.
they had never, ever before in the history of the Maricopa County Elections Department used that data to evaluate the performance of their employees, correct?
Well, yeah, they didn't have it available to them because we designed it together. In fact,
Right.
it isn't just the report that they gave me. You have to actually process that report to extract the data on how long each individual is taking to evaluate a signature. And so you have to do further processing on it to have that information available to you to be able to evaluate your employees. So not only did they not have that report, they didn't even have the report on which that was based.
Right. And so, and that's part of the importance then of Arizona's very liberal, I'll say, Public Records Act that, they've got to have a pretty damn good reason not to be giving the public what are defined as public records. And these have always been defined as public records. And so it's not only the public's ability then to analyze the performance and behavior of their government to make sure it's consistent with what our elected representatives are telling us it is correct, but it's also, we election integrity experts in the industry or whatever industry you happen to be in working collaboratively with the elections department and those officials filling public records, actually help them create new tools that they can use to evaluate the performance of people in our elections, which to me, I mean, elections are the bedrock of our constitutional republic, right? They are the base from which all of our rights and liberties flow or are taken away from us. And so, without transparency and without integrity in our elections, we really sort of lose everything, don't we?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we're helping them help us. We're helping them. We're thinking of ways that they can create their own tools to watch their own work. And the disposition report that we designed that you're talking about, the timing report, that's just one. We have other ideas and other requests that we made that could translate into windows into other parts of the process that they could use to evaluate their processes. And these are some of the things that, rather than being collaborative about, these are some of the things they're just saying no for no particular reason other than I suspect a tinfoil hat again, or I'm going to imagine that I'm one of those election deniers. They don't want to provide these reports because they don't want to know what they can find out, or what we can find out, and what they can find out also about their processes.
Well, let me give you another example to that.
Yeah.
Right. So we review the video footage and we learn a lot. And the review of the video footage and the communication with the elections department has implemented security changes, right? From ballot drop box pickups, right? You were part of that, Chris, when we got them to tighten down the ship there, locking up the shred bins where mail-in ballots were being thrown into. But another example is a public records request for log files for the server room back in 2021. We requested the key card access logs for the server room, and they were all but eager to submit that to us. But then we said, what about a sign-in sheet for guests? I mean, we're seeing with these key logs, there are people going in the room with someone else's badge, but we're also seeing groups of 3, 4, 5 people going in and touching the servers that don't have a key card. Do you have a guest log? So, within 3 days of that public records request, they hung a clipboard on the door and are now requiring anybody that enters the server room to sign in. So public oversight improves the process, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's I think that's probably one of the primary functions of WTP USAA, right? Is as a repertorial organization. I mean, we conduct investigations of our government's activities and behaviors, and we report them directly to the public. So the public then can contact their elected representatives and have these necessary changes made that lead to more secure and better functioning elections. And so, I don't know. I think maybe what we do is sign off by everybody, pitching a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. How about that for an idea?
Yeah, before we do that, Brian, so I'm going to have you answer a question and then pitch your idea. So question, does Justine Heal have to sue the Board of Supervisors?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, I don't necessarily know that a court's going to get involved, right? Because the Board of Supervisors has statutory functions. Justine Heal has statutory functions. Now, I think he may have a cause of action if they completely deny him access to an IT department that then undermines his ability to fulfill his statutory functions as the registrar of records or even as the recorder. And so, he may have a decent argument in that regard. But we know the Board of Supervisors, I talk a lot about it on What the Fuck's Up, is both, it's a quasi-legislative and a quasi-executive entity, right? They have the power to make rules, and they have the power to effect rules, right? And so, this is something we're going to have to agree, we're going to have to work our way through. But I'm not sure the courts are really going to want to get involved unless Justine Heal can show that the Board of Supervisors is definitely stymieing his ability to perform his statutory or constitutional functions, especially with respect to being registrar of voters, or signature verification processes. So my recommendation to the Board of Supervisors is simply this. I mean, what's wrong with transparency? You guys have already given a couple of examples where the work that we do can make the process better. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And that is exactly why Arizona has a very liberal public records law. Bring transparency to elections instead of concealing things and telling us to sit down, shut up, and let the bureaucrats dictate who wins and who loses our elections. We can actually, as we've done in the past, help make elections better, and that is our goal.
Same question for you, Chris. Does Justine Heal need to sue? Does he sue? And what is your words to the Board of Supervisors? What is your recommendation?
Well, I'd have to defer to the attorney on whether or not to sue, but certainly there's no professional reason to take away his staff or to put his staff under the supervision of somebody other than him. He needs to be able to manage and direct his staff. And to the public records subject, the ideas that we had that produced the report, the disposition report or the timing report, those aren't our only ideas. We've got public records requests in right now that I think I'm as certain as I was about the disposition report being useful to them and to us to understand what happens in elections. There are PRRs in the queue right now that I'm as certain will be helpful to the department and to us to understand how the processes work. So they need to get back on board with, they need to be more transparent than they have been in the past. They need to shorten the cycle and take out the bureaucracy in the process to get us those responses, so that we can feed back to them and get back to them the information they need to improve their processes. And overall, we elected Justine Heal for a reason. And so let him perform, let him do as much as he possibly can in this new role, give him as much power as possible rather than taking influence and power away from him. He needs to be able to do it. It's conspicuous what's happened here. The changes that have been made are conspicuous. They've taken power away from the guy that we put in that role, replacing the guy that was in that role before. And the fact that the guy was in that role before had a part in making those changes, that's also conspicuous. So let's undo what's obvious to the public as something that's put in the way as a roadblock in front of the guy that we put in that office.
Shelby, same questions to you.
Yeah, so I think he sues. I don't know where that's going to get him, but I think it's ultimately going to end up in court. The negotiations have been going on way too long, and we've got an jurisdictional election occurring in April. And I don't think Justin has time to play games anymore. He needs his budget funded and he needs his resources. So I think he's going to have to pull the trigger. And frankly, the longer he waits, I think the less likely a lawsuit will do him of any benefit. But words to the Board of Supervisors. I understand that some of you may believe that you were elected or reelected because of the appetite to stop people from drawing questions about the elections. But what I will tell you is, Mark Stewart, you were elected on election integrity. Debbie Lesko, you ran on the premise of election integrity. So Thomas Galvin, you are letting him run the show. You are letting him dictate your future as a board of supervisor. And I ask that Mark Stewart, Debbie Lesko, and Kate Brophy McGee, you ran, you won, because the American people want changes in their election, the same reason Justin Heap beat Stephen Richer. So I ask that you get bolder and you stand up against this legacy leadership of Thomas Galvin, and you let the American people know that you stand on their side and that these elections matter, and you give Justin Heap the tools he needs to be successful. Because fail or win, we all fail if Justin fails. If you give him what he needs to succeed, we all succeed. Because no matter what happens and who's in control, Justin is the one that's going to be bearing the brunt of the public scrutiny if the elections go badly. And I'm hoping that's not your objective here. I'm hoping your objective is not to set Justin Heap up for failure. So I'm going to err on the side of that you want our elections to succeed, and therefore you want Justin to succeed. So do what's right, stand up to Galvin, get this handled, and get it handled now.
Excellent answer.
And with that, from the words
Peace.
of my friend Brian, peace.
Peace out.